The science is clear when it comes to wearing masks during this pandemic, yet we are still seeing a lot of resistance to wearing them. This isn't the first time in our history, though, that the public has been required to adapt to health mandates. So joining me today to discuss is Hilary Bergsieker, Associate Professor of Psychology at the University of Waterloo. Welcome to the show, Hilary.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
So I guess the first question is, why are we seeing such a resistance to wearing masks?
That's a great question. And I would say the core psychological motivation that relates to that is something we call reactants. This is a natural human tendency to sort of want to do the opposite when we're told we have to do something. So fairly basic, commonplace motivation. Anyone who's ever raised children could probably relate. But there are strategies to circumvent that, to kind of overcome that natural resistance to being told to do something that constrains our freedoms.
So yes, because what we're seeing a lot right now, I feel, is that, there's sort of two tribes, those who will wear masks and those who won't. And they're both sort of shouting each other, which is really cementing the positions. So if we want people to wear masks, shaming and shouting at them is probably not going to get that done, correct?
Yes, that is correct. I mean, I've heard humorous anecdotes about people paying their kids 50 cents every time they loudly say, "Mom, why is that person not wearing a mask?" or things like that. But as a scientist, I wouldn't recommend that strategy. I think as soon as it becomes an us versus them, as soon as it becomes divisive, you're going to see compliance levels drop. So in general, when we're trying to motivate good public health decision making, we want to appeal to people's core values. We also want to appeal to overarching goals that bind us all together. So connecting this to the idea that Canadians are caring for each other as fellow Canadians, that this is a patriotic, loving action to take, that especially for mask wearing, as opposed to maybe hand washing or other procedures, there's an extremely strong component of care for others, that the biggest benefit may to be to those around you, to those you love, to your neighbor, and so forth. So the important, I think, step we need to be taking here is to not try to point fingers and label and make this a sort of a tribal or political thing in the way that it has unfortunately been politicized in some other countries, but to really try to focus on what unites us here and why it's worth the inconvenience or discomfort of a mask to do the right thing by each other.
It was funny, it was brought to my attention that, when we brought in seatbelt rules and when, we were battling HIV, we were looking at the same sort of resistance in the public to new measures. I feel what's different now is maybe the internet and sort of that amplification of the messaging on both sides. Do you feel that's having an impact here at all?
Absolutely. There's clear data showing that lowered trust in science, for example, is a component in a lot of the resistance to following public health recommendations. If people don't trust the experts or don't trust the leaders, or if some leaders in some cases are giving unscientific guidance to their followers, that obviously interferes with appropriate adoption of public health behaviors. I think it's also important to think about honesty. I mean, part of the issue that we've had, and we've seen this in Canada, even with the World Health Organization, is that there's been mixed messaging on masks, that early on in a desire to sort of prevent hoarding and to preserve a scarce resource for healthcare workers who need it most, there was a lot of sort of doubt or misinformation sown about the necessity of masks for just everyday use. And we're sort of reaping the unfortunate rewards of that now, that uncertainty, of course, takes hold in many people's minds. Combine that with the physical discomfort, the inconvenience of having to procure and clean and so forth a mask, and you're, of course, going to get lower than complete mask wearing compliance.
Right. It's like when the newspaper publishes a story and then they later on publish a retraction. Far more people saw that first story than saw the retraction. So once it's cemented, people just will remember it that way. So going forward then, what are some tips for getting people to get on board with mask wearing? What do you suggest?
I think one tip is to make it identity expressive. So as I was saying before, appealing to our common values is important. If you're a Christian, you might wear a mask because you love your neighbor. That is a core biblical teaching. If you're a liberal, you might wear a mask because care for others is one of the core moral foundations for modern progressives and liberals. If you're patriot or someone who really feels a strong sense of national identity. You might be wearing a mask because you want to protect your, fellow citizens and residents, so your country can be a sort of a safer place and not a hot spot. There are lots of different motivations that might lead people to engage in mask wearing, but I think focusing on superordinate shared identities, focusing on valuing elders or the vulnerable among us. There have been plenty of other cases where people are willing to rally to the cause to help others, and we need to focus on ways to frame mask wearing as a behavior that expresses our core values.
Okay, wonderful.
To some extent, if a mask can be branded with a message, either a flag of a region that's important to you, a mascot of a sports team, anything that lets you feel like it's at least a little bit stylish or self-expressive, or not that you're just complying with a, unpleasant government mandate, is going to boost people's sense of well-being and commitment to wearing masks.
I love it. So if people want to know more, if there's is there a resource you recommend people could maybe go read more about this sort of, and ways to convince people?
I think that a lot of this research comes out of the persuasion literature about how to change people's minds through making strong arguments. So giving people the evidence. Some people are going to be persuaded by that. For others, it will be more about seeing an attractive communicator or someone they admire, putting out there the reason to do it, seeing that their favorite celebrity wearing a mask may be the turning point for some individuals. So I think we know from psychology that what changes people's minds depends on how invested people feel, how much information they're looking for. So I think, that you could find in any undergraduate social psychology textbook. It's not something that's hard to find or mysterious type resource. And I think that just in general, the idea of focusing on overarching goals is something we know from a lot of work on on diversity and challenges of diversity, how to bring people together. So there isn't one core document I would point you to, because this is wisdom gathered over thousands of different surveys and experiments that try to help us understand how to change minds. And I think the most important feature there is making it a norm. A norm is like an unspoken standard. And as soon as people see everyone around them wearing a mask, that's going to be the point at which it crosses a certain tipping point, and this becomes a near universal behavior.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining me today, Hilary. This is great. And I do believe that we will get there. So thanks again for joining me.
Absolutely. I'm very happy to do so. Thank you.